From Acres U.S.A., you are listening to the Acres U.S.A. podcast, a conversational podcast where we'll explore sustainable farming, regenerative practices, and the latest innovations in eco-agriculture with some of your favorite farmers and ranchers. I'm your host, Taylor Henry, the owner and CEO of Acres U.S.A. Welcome to the Acres U.S.A. podcast.
All right. We have one more final treat in store for you guys in this year's program. Courtney White has journeyed from city boy to environmental activist to advocate for regenerative agriculture. Tonight, he will share his story of hope. Despite the challenges facing the future of regenerative agriculture, we all have much to celebrate. Please welcome to the stage Courtney White.
Thank you. Is this on? Can everybody hear me all right? Thank you, Sarah. I want to thank everybody for sticking it out to the end here. I've been here since Monday myself, and I really appreciate folks coming tonight. Thanks to Acres, the organization, for putting this event on. Thanks for inviting me out from New Mexico. Are we good? No, that's good. I'm kind of slide heavy, so I wanted to have a little bit of dark up here and kind of show you some stuff. And I wanted to talk a little bit tonight about something a little different than maybe you've heard this week. It's been, I don't know about you, but it's been an awesome and kind of intimidating amount of information. And I wanted to talk a little bit about hope. And this is something that has been on my mind a lot recently. In the course of this week, in the workshops and lectures, this has come up, sometimes in the context of how do you maintain hope in the face of so many challenges going on. And I wanted to share with you tonight kind of my story. As Sarah mentioned, I come not from an agricultural background. I actually come from, Are we good? Okay. I come from a urban background and also an environmentalist background, and kind of came to the same place everybody is tonight. So I wanted to kind of take you through this journey a little bit and talk a little bit more maybe contemplatively about some of the larger issues that we've been discussing this week, kind of from my perspective and what I've learned over the last 20 years being involved in sort of the activist side of regenerative agriculture. For those of you who don't know me, I started a nonprofit organization and I've written some books on this. I'm going to kind of weave that into this story. So I wanted to start a little bit with this quote. This is something I read many, many years ago, and it's something that's been kind of on my mind a lot. This is E.B. White, who wrote Charlotte's Web, among other children's books. He had this quote: "I rise in the morning torn between a desire to save the world and a desire to savor the world. Sometimes makes it hard to plan the day." And I like this because I have felt the same kind of tension in my career between the desire to save the world and get involved in these things, and also step back and learn to savor the world as well. And that's part of what I want to talk about tonight, is that kind of balance between activism and also enjoying some of the other parts of the world that we live in today. So my background, I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, about as far away from agriculture as you could possibly get. My father was a doctor, grew up right in the middle of Phoenix, not thinking about these issues at all. My original interest was in archaeology. I did a lot of archaeology over the years. Arizona State University ended up writing a book about this, archaeological survey in the Southwest, published some years ago. This was kind of my general interest. Initially, though I was a photographer, I was interested in kind of that savor part of the Western landscape, looking at what archaeologists did. I ended up doing a kind of a fine art project back in 1990, 1991, looking at the frontier in the West. And these are just some images from that. Again, I was trying to think about the West, the working West, looking at some of the issues that I saw at the time, thinking about environmental issues, not thinking necessarily about agricultural issues, looking at environmentalists and ranchers, and this kind of tapestry of Western personalities, potters, sculptors, different kinds of landscapes in the West, Ghost Ranch. Ended up putting a book out that Wallace Stegner wrote a foreword for some years ago before he died. But this was the savor part of my background, the things I was looking at in the West. Things changed for me personally in 1994 when we had a change in leadership in Washington, and I saw some of the things I was concerned about, some environmental laws and things that became threatened. I became involved with the Sierra Club. This is in Santa Fe, which is where I live. And I ended up getting involved with the environmental movement. And this was my image of cattle ranching at the time. This is what I'd been told by my fellow environmentalists. This is what I saw as I looked around the landscape. I didn't know anything better. I didn't know anything different. This is what I thought cattle ranching did to the arid West. Fortunately, not long after I got involved, I met Jim Winder, who's a rancher in southern New Mexico. Jim ranched differently. He came and joined the Sierra Club. This is back in that period of time when there was a lot of conflict between environmentalists and ranchers, in particular over the reintroduction of the Mexican wolf in the Southwest. Jim was the only rancher in the state who publicly supported the reintroduction of the wolf, and the reason he did that was because he bunched his cows together and moved them around, what we now call holistic management. Jim was an early pioneer, an early practitioner. Jim had a funny sense of humor. He liked to talk about the legless cow in the West as a rare species. But for me, as an environmentalist, when I met Jim, I hadn't really thought about these issues, and my antenna went up, and we spent a lot of time together. I found out that there are other crazy ranchers in the West doing this kind of rotational, short duration, holistic ranching. So Jim and I and another conservationist talked about this. Again, this is the mid-'90s. There was just constant conflict between these groups. We ended up starting a nonprofit organization called the Quivira Coalition in 1997 with the idea of trying to find some common ground here and promote practices which we now call regenerative agriculture. Wasn't a term we used back then. We're mostly focused on cattle ranching and holistic management. This was the tenor of the times back then. As I said, a lot of conflict between ranchers and environmentalists making the daily news. We came in with a different attitude. Could we find some hope here? How could you resolve these conflicts, these long-standing conflicts between these different communities, really these different tribes in the West? So with the practices that Jim promoted, that I saw work on the land, we ended up talking about hopeful solutions to range problems. We started over, and I think this is really important when we talk about how to make these practices effective. We started over on the ground. I like to think of Quivira as the ultimate grassroots organization because we literally started over at the grass and the roots. We wanted to have these conversations on ranches looking at the soil. So much of it had gone political at that point, and nobody was really talking about the things that mattered below our ground. And I found, as an environmentalist, as we talked to ranchers, that you could talk about soil, grass, and water. And this was important because there was no conversation really going on at the time. We ended up doing lots of little workshops on different kinds of topics. This is a hayride down here, a Quivira hayride. We started an annual conference, much like this one. It's obviously a smaller scale, still continues to this day. We promoted certain kinds of practices, herding, electric fencing, things like that now seem sort of pretty commonplace today, but back then were really quite new to many folks, particularly to the environmental community that still was trying to wrap its head around this idea that cattle management could be sustainable, particularly in the arid West. These weren't new ideas. If you kind of dug into this, Otto Leopold talked about many of these back in the 30s and 40s. He actually started his career in New Mexico with the Forest Service, which many folks don't realize that. And then eventually he drove around the Southwest looking at overgrazing. He was the first person to kind of draw the connection between erosion and cattle ranching. Leopold, by the way, I'm sure many of you have read his writings, was someone who also, I think, kind of straddled this line about save and savor. He certainly was writing about questions like land health. At the same time, his essays are so beautiful and they're so evocative of this natural world that I really admire the way that he kind of went back and forth on these things. So this is a kind of an example of what cattle management could do, both right and wrong. The images on the bottom here are some of the classic kind of problems we have of overgrazing. Leopold, again, was the first to kind of target these things. And this was pretty much an eye-opening visit for me. This is a chunk of land south of Tucson, Arizona. And thinking about land health, thinking about water and grass and soil and the principles that we now call regenerative, would that be a regenerative ranch to you? Do you think that, remember what Christine said the other day about where's the green? So where's the green in this picture? Well, here's a map that was made at the time. So I do this correctly. That ranch is right here. This is a map of grass, soil, and water function, looking at rangeland variables. Red is bad, green is good. I won't go into all the details. I just wanted you to look at this part here. Overgrazed, probably dysfunctional, nothing green on it. Then this was farther down that map. Similar kind of look to it. Don't see anything green growing here. What could be going on here from a land health perspective, a regenerative perspective? This is also not functioning well. This was the National Wildlife Refuge. It hadn't been grazed by cattle in 20, 25 years. And when I brought this up to the environmental community, and I said, look, let's talk about land function before we start talking about, what we're going to do with that land, graze it, wildlife, whatever. This is something folks didn't want to hear. And this is where the idea of kind of bringing folks together came together to talk about those principles of land function. And this really kind of opened my eyes to how we talk to audiences, how we talk to the public about this. Certain communities just still didn't want to kind of hear that. Fortunately, the science community, interagency group came together and talked about some of the variables for measuring these things. Again, this was news at the time, the idea that you can have these water, soil, and grass functions working together. So here's a pop quiz. Now, this is something that I used to kind of show folks on my early days, and thinking about Christine, what she said, where's the green on this? Where are the cows on this? So there's two questions here. What side looks more functional to you? Which looks healthier, which would be the right side? And then the question I would ask folks is, where were the cattle here? Which is secondary, because you want to ask whether it's functional first. Well, the cattle were on the right. There's a trap. They're there for a couple of days. They stirred the soil up, and the rains came, and the grass grew. This is not what most folks at the time thought land health meant. It meant no cows on these landscapes. Here's another one, same sort of pop quiz. First question, which side of the fence looks healthiest? Thinking about a land health perspective. Well, it looks like the left side. That's where the green is. On the right, what do you think is going on here on the right? This is CRP land. This is land that's been out of production for 20, 25 years. Pretty much nothing has happened to it, and it's just gone senescent, right? So this is, again, another example of how you talk about land function with folks, and then you talk about how you're going to fix these problems. We called this the new ranch. It wasn't a terribly innovative term at the time. It was something we just kind of made up, but it did describe this kind of new approach to looking at land use in the West. Grazing is a natural process. Disturbance is a critical part of most ecosystems, which at the time, fire was coming back on these landscapes. You remember the Forest Service, if you've been out west at all, Forest Service had a policy for many, many years called put it out by 10 a.m., meaning all fires got out or put out. Today, of course, fire is back in these landscapes, maybe too much in some respects. Grazing was going through the same process. We understand if done naturally, done correctly, in nature's image, it has a role in these landscapes. And the reason this worked, continues to work today in the Southwest and the West, and probably out here as well, is that we activated something we call the radical center. This is a term that a rancher in Arizona came up with, Bill McDonald. The idea being that you can have effective change, and we've talked about change a lot this week. How do you get it to happen? By working, not just working together, but working on projects that have this kind of radical centrism to it. And by that I mean that here's a kind of a collaborative movement over here. I'd say maybe that's where the sort of environmental concerns are. You have the land health community over here, scientists, researchers talking about those parts of the landscapes. Down here you had the farmers and ranchers modeling sustainable use. Those projects that pulled together evenly on these created this kind of radical centrism. And these projects worked on the landscape, where you had farmers and ranchers and scientists and conservationists kind of all working together. If they hung up their political agendas at the door on the way in, which is sometimes difficult, then this model actually worked pretty well. We ended up writing a statement, kind of a radical, welcome to the radical center statement in 2003, which I think is still relevant, in fact, I know is still relevant today. You might look at this. We talked to the ranching community about raising its standard of performance in the West, meaning doing a better job of ranch management. The environmental community need to resolve to work constructively with the agricultural community, which is a hard thing for environmentalists to agree to do. That the federal and state land management agencies had to agree to actually do stuff rather than just defend protocol. And then finally, and this actually has turned out to be the hardest one of all, trying to get the research community to actually make their work relevant to farmers and ranchers. I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying that, but that was part of our frustration. So we put this out, we published it, it's still out there. The idea, a lot of folks signed up, try to create this radical centrism beyond the political realm to try to work together on landscapes and bring folks together. Of all the things we've done over the years, this is the one that people seem to keep coming back to, particularly today in this kind of political climate we have in this country, where this idea of a center seems to have kind of collapsed, and a lot of reasons for it, but I still believe that if you can get out on the ground and talk about projects that pull equally on that triangle, and you bring these folks together and set goals and standards, that the radical center can still lead to positive changes, including many of the things that we were talking about earlier. How do you get these larger concepts implemented? For me personally, the savor part of this, that was a lot of the save. The savor was meeting some phenomenal people. Again, I'm not an agriculturalist. I met just incredible ranchers and farmers in the process of doing this and had strong relationships, and that's how these things work too. I also met Bill Zedike. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the next phase that we went through. So as we worked on ranching issues, and my educational curve, which was pretty steep, expanded, I began to realize that we had other challenges in these landscapes, challenges I didn't realize at first at the time. I was just kind of focused on that land management, grazing intersection, until I met Bill Zedike, who was a retired Forest Service biologist who had reinvented himself as a riparian restoration specialist. And until I met Bill, I didn't quite realize the challenges that we had in Western landscapes. I don't know if this will translate into the Midwest, but I think it will a little bit. So here's some of the challenges we faced out west. Can anybody guess what this is? It's not a creek. It is a creek now, but it wasn't a creek when it started. If you know your Western heritage, old days, what do you think this was? Any guesses?
Hey, eco-farmers. This is Taylor Henry with Acres U.S.A. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I enjoy interviewing these folks. If you're serious about regenerative agriculture, I've got an incredible resource you need to check out, the Acres U.S.A. membership. You farm in the physical world, and you deserve a physical printed magazine to match. Since 1971, Acres U.S.A. magazine has been the leading voice in ecological agriculture, delivering the best insights from regenerative farmers, agronomists, and researchers to help you farm profitably without toxic chemicals. Our membership included physical and digital copies of the magazine each month of the year, which has always been a standard for Acres U.S.A., but we wanted to over-deliver on content. When I acquired this business, I was happy to find that we had years of audio files from presentations at our annual Eco-Ag conference. And guess what? They were hiding. Well, not anymore. We developed this membership portal that gives you access to the recordings from farmers like Gabe Brown, Gary Zimmer, Joel Salatin, and Mark Shepard. We also include recordings of private events. Finally, if you are like me and you like listening to content, we are now producing a membership-only podcast of each issue of the magazine, so you can consume each article while you're out in the field. To make things even sweeter, you'll get discounts on books, workshops, and events to keep expanding your knowledge. So are you ready to take your farming to the next level? Join today for a ridiculously low price at eco-farming.com or see details in the notes.
Yep. Nope. Wagon road. It's an old wagon road. So the wagon road went up over the hill and dale here. It started to erode. The rains came. The soils are friable. They erode easily. and down went the water, eventually capturing a creek. This is about 10 feet deep. You can imagine what this is doing to that landscape. But here's the picture that really kind of opened my eyes to the save part that we had to now work on. So we were working with that rancher I showed you a little bit earlier on his land. This is western New Mexico. I walked up that creek and took this picture. And I asked the rancher, Jim Williams, what was going on here. And he said that those fence posts sat on the ground in 1937. Excuse me. And I didn't... think about that. 1937, those sat on the ground. If you kind of block off the top with your hand, I knew there was an erosion problem we had in this country, but I didn't realize it was quite that bad. I asked an NRCS agent later, Natural Resources Conservation, Old Soil Science Service, I asked him how much in New Mexico looks like this. And he said most of the state looks like this. And a lot of reasons why, overgrazing, some other issues, but this is a serious problem. If you're worried about land function, land health, water, wildlife, whatever it is, this is what we got to deal with. So again, that concern is rising here. So Bill Zedike had come up with some ideas to fix these systems, and this is the one we did in that creek in particular. And I didn't realize we could do this until I met Bill. So this is that system there. We've got these structures in here, and what he's trying to do is slow water down. He's trying to get that water to soak in and for grass to grow. So here's an example of a structure that we built. Here's the creek. He's turned the creek with a very simple structure here. A structure, these are my children, are now in college. And this is a sandbar here that got built after one flood event. He's trying to get these systems to re-meander. They generally have straightened up over time and cut down using some natural hydrological principles. Here's a good example here. Here's the creek. He put a little structure here, and this is where it used to cut into that bank, and now it's turned here. So here's an example of kind of what he's been doing. Here's a typical eroded system in the Southwest, and then he put these structures in, and the system begins to turn over time with the power of small flood events. He calls them 1 to 2 year flood events. And that system then begins to meander itself. Nature will do this over time. Bill is just speeding this process up. As he will tell folks, don't do this in your backyard. And you get involved some math. You got to know your geomorphology and this sort of stuff. But if you do all that, this process works really well. And here's a couple of examples. So up on Comanche Creek, which is Forest Service land in northern New Mexico, we got involved in a big project to try to restore this landscape that had been pretty well decimated. And again, I want to come back to that save part of the equation here. That's the Valle Vidal. Those are logging roads. This had a 6,000 head herd of animals on this landscape, and there's a historic gold mining district. So they had about every Old West sin you could think of kind of on this land. There's a good reason why the private landowner, Pennzoil, actually gave it to the Forest Service for a tax break in 1992, I think. The Forest Service has been dealing with it ever since. It's home to the Rio Grande cutthroat trout, which is the New Mexico state fish, which is in trouble, heading probably to the endangered species list. So I got a call from a fishing organization wanting to figure out a way to put this radical center at work here and heal this creek up without having to go to court. And I called Bill, and we got involved in a long project here that's still ongoing, trying to get this system up to speed using natural principles. And this, again, this is part of that regenerative system. This is not agriculture, of course, but it's something I wanted to show you because it's something that gets kind of left out of agriculture, thinking about these systems. These little structures here we put in trying to steer the creek away from the side of the hill, which is eroding. This is an example here of a structure that we put in to create a little pillow of water and turn the creek this way. And you can see a couple of years later how it responded. Bill calls it thinking like a creek. We're trying to think how nature would respond here and kind of goose that system along. It fit very nicely with the ranchers we were working with. We're also trying to think like a buffalo, let's say. Think like a grazer, a natural herbivore in these landscapes. And Bill would work with ranchers who had their cattle doing that so that the two of these things kind of work together. But again, we're using kind of natural principles here to heal these systems. Bill talks about these one-rock dams. Don't build anything higher than a dam. And what you're trying to do here is slow water down and get to sink in. Bill will tell you that if you learned anything from him, do not build a dam. Creeks don't want to be lakes. They want to be creeks, and they will be creeks again. And we have a tendency on what it is to want to pile stuff up and stop these water things, which I'll show you in a sec. So this is and then Bill also targeted roads. Low standard rural roads on ranches and other places cause tremendous ecological damage. I didn't realize that, as an environmentalist getting involved in this, I didn't realize what roads and culverts and things can do to these landscapes. For example, this here creates this plume of sediment here, which is bad for the fish, as you can imagine. We got in there and fixed that system using Bill's principles. These things heal up really quickly, and Bill ended up writing a book about this, kind of the first of its kind at the time, how to look at these landscapes and heal them. We tended to go to these big solutions with yellow machines and cement and gabions and all that kind of stuff, and Bill's using very simple but appropriate natural technologies here to get these systems to heal. So here's another pop quiz. Now, thinking about all these things. So what does that look like, a healthy wet meadow to you? Wet meadows in New Mexico are very valuable. They're rare. We're a dry state. And so they're valuable to wildlife, they're valuable to cattle, they're valuable to everybody else. But does that look like a healthy wet meadow to you? Would Aldo Leopold be happy with this? No. It's got erosion running right up the middle of it, dropping that water table. Why do you think this happened? Thinking like a creek here, thinking like a wet meadow. What do you think happened here? It's erosion started by a culvert, not cattle. A badly placed culvert right down the bottom here created a little dry waterfall that then migrated over time up this creek, draining it. That's all it took, just a badly designed and placed culvert. This is what the Forest Service used as a remedy. It knew it had a problem here, so they went in there and dammed it. Remember what I just told you? Bill was his saying, creeks don't want to be lakes, they want to be creeks again. What do you think is going to happen to this dam? That's a 6-foot drop there. If you don't maintain it constantly, it's going to come undone. It's going to blow out. All this is going to undercut, and then eventually all of this sediment will move. And Bill will tell you that it would have been better if you'd done nothing here than build this thing, because this system all will move. Well, that's how we respond to these systems. We tend to get in there and try to strong-arm them. Bill has a different methodology here. Here's a cut going up this meadow. A lot of reasons why this can happen, primarily roads. Bill had a system where he put down filter fabric. This is biofilter fabric to sort of seal it up and put rocks, one rock high, no taller than that here, to get the erosion to stop, and the system heals itself over time. It's wet. Plants will grow, and that system will heal up. It was really an eye-opening experience for me to be involved with Bill. This is an example of that creek that I talked about a little bit earlier, healing itself here. The fish actually is doing pretty well, and we got through a couple of dry years recently with enough water in the system that everybody was very impressed. And this is regenerative, and we didn't think about it at the time. It's also very hopeful. I mean, this process we broke through a lot of conflict built around the fish and these systems. Many environmentalists don't like the idea of restoration. They think that we don't know what to do. We're not humble enough. Bill is the most humble person I've ever met. So we can actually heal these systems up if you think like a creek, or in the case of the ranchers, think like an herbivore. It's also fun. A lot of folks came out and got involved in the creeks, and it's very satisfying to put rocks in the mud and get these systems up and running again. Got Boy Scouts involved, all kinds of things. Now I want to show you quickly another example of Bill's ideas at work. This is a farm, actually, nearby, well, not real close by, near Folsom, New Mexico. This is A daughter came to us whose father had kind of abandoned hope on this farm. The creek, the river had actually downgraded and was reducing the water table far enough that the farmland was starting to dry up. These are not just ugly pictures. These are things he was trying to do to save the farm. So it actually is not just a tire dump. He was actually trying to stop erosion. And he eventually ended up getting out the bulldozer and damming the river. I mean, literally just built a dam across the river to save the farm. He didn't have any permits. You can imagine how the water administrators in New Mexico felt about that. So he got in trouble pretty quick and retired to his house. His daughter came out and said, let's try something else. So we got Bill involved, Bill Zelak, and we ended up taking out the dam, re-meandering these systems, again, using careful math and things here, and ended up doing a lot of work in the uplands. These are small structures to try to slow that water down that I talked about before, to try to get the system to heal up. And this is an example of how it responded. So here's a structure right here that we put in. Not all this is voluntary. We didn't plant any seeds or anything here. Here's the farmland here. So the creek is now bent away from the farmland, just using this structure right here. And then this is back when it used to rain more. And it responded very quickly. And I was just amazed at how Bill's ideas worked so beautifully. They're cheap. They're effective. You just need some sticks and some rocks and some volunteers and some math. And you can get these systems to respond pretty quickly. I asked Bill once about other places in the country, and he said that the hydrological principles are the same pretty much wherever you are. So if you've got erosion, you've got these kinds of issues, this is a way to fix it. This is how this ranch responded. This made me think again about the savor part of this, the savor. This was really satisfying to see. It was beautiful. It's green. It's lush. Whatever you want to do with it later, graze it, farm it, whatever, it was just beautiful to look at. Bill's work, I always thought, had kind of an artistic side of it. It had a very aesthetic appeal to a lot of his stuff. This is just a very functional one rock dam to slow water down here. But I thought it was this is a good example of land art, I guess, form and function. Again, sort of thinking about these issues. If folks are interested in what he's done, Bill wrote a book for us that now Chelsea Green is handling. It was out on the table, I noticed, but if you're interested in how this system works, I'd recommend get this 250-page manual on how to fix these systems. So this was, again, a hopeful answer to what I thought was a pretty big problem in the Southwest, how to fix these systems in order to improve the land's regenerative capacity, which until Bill and some other folks came along, we weren't quite sure how to do this. The next step for us was to actually become ranchers ourselves as an organization. I didn't expect this, but we ended up taking over a Forest Service allotment, a ranch, 37,000 acres near Santa Fe. We made a land health map of it, and this is part of this idea. You got to understand your system from land health perspectives. This is red is not healthy, green is healthy. And the issue up there was forests and trees and meadows. I'll go into details, give you a sense of kind of what the problems were, not on a fire on the landscape. Long story short, there are not many tools in the toolbox to fix these landscapes, just a few: livestock, fire, mechanical treatment, those kinds of things. But more importantly for us, and we didn't expect this, we ended up getting in the cattle business. It was kind of a long evolution. We ended up, we were managing other people's cattle. We ended up managing our own herd in 2006, and then eventually got into the grass-fed beef business. I didn't anticipate this. We ended up selling beef to Santa Fe. This was right before Michael Pollan and Barbara Kingsolver and all the books came out. And I was really quite surprised by the response in town. It was like, and then I got to go to Tierra Madre. I don't know if folks have been to Tierra Madre in Italy, the big slow food gathering. I didn't anticipate going. Here I am there and thinking, I'm a city boy from Phoenix, Arizona, environmentalist. What am I doing at Tierra Madre as a grass-fed beef producer? And a member of the New Mexico Cattle Growers Association, and the Sierra Club, which I'm not sure anybody was pleased with that. So, but it showed me how these things begin all kind of dovetail together. food and water and ranching. We didn't call it regenerative at the time. We didn't like the word sustainability. We were trying to figure out what we were actually doing here, but all the principles were the same. Again, thinking like a cow, thinking like a creek, and then figuring out how to market these values to a public that was just then beginning to understand what we were doing. Unfortunately, at the time, our concerns continued to rise. My concerns continued to rise. I feel like as we were sort of, I wouldn't say solving problems, figuring out where the hope was, here the challenges to us and to our hopeful feelings continue to rise. This is Katrina. We ended up changing our mission statement slightly in 2008 to put the word resilience into it. And some of this was discussed this week, particularly Andre Liu and those other folks, and Vandana talked about how we deal with some of these larger challenges. We realized that we were building resilience in these systems through these regenerative practices for things like climate change, for these concerns that are now all over the place. But here's the thing that really kind of got me going. I didn't realize at the time. This publication came across my desk in 2009, and I had never thought about this before. I was feeling a little down about the hopefulness of this kind of larger situation, even though we had these solutions at the grassroots level. And I looked at this book and I realized that this is what we were doing. We were thinking about food and land use. We're working on creeks and working on grass-fed beef, working on cattle management, and building this kind of larger movement together. I had not thought about the climate change connection. I had no idea that there was one. I hadn't met Christine Jones yet. I was trying to think out what was going on here. So I read this book, little pamphlet, and I saw in this publication these words that more than 30% of all greenhouse gases arise from the land use. This is now familiar to many of you. At the time, it was news. And then most importantly, was in orange, that only land-based terrestrial carbon sequestration efforts offer the possibility of large-scale removal of greenhouse gases. And that's been discussed this week. I didn't understand what this meant. This is 2009. I'd not been thinking about these questions at all. I turned the page, and this is what I saw. What were the 5 strategies for mitigating climate change? Familiar to you now. Enriching soil with carbon, we know about that. Farming with perennials, we know about that. Climate-friendly livestock production, this was still hard for the environmental community to kind of wrap their minds around, and they still have trouble with it today. Protecting natural areas, and we were about saving ranches, saving these open spaces, and then restoring degraded watersheds. I read this and I thought, holy smokes, this is what the Quivira Coalition has been doing for 12 years. I didn't realize I had a climate connection. So I ended up making this map, feeling hopeful now about how we kind of link all these things together. I just tried to think of what we now would call regenerative practice, sustainable, resilient, natural, organic, things that I could think of. I put them on this one landscape. And in 2010, we had a conference on the carbon ranch, the idea, which Christine came and spoke at, the idea that we're all on this map, everybody, not just farmers and ranchers, but eaters, hikers, conservationists, school kids, anybody who drinks water, eats food. Everybody's on this landscape somewhere. We have a role to play in this carbon universe of these carbon concerns, whether it's managing cattle, fixing creeks, buying grass-fed food. And this was exciting. This was hopeful. It's still exciting. It's still hopeful. A lot of things have flowed out of this in the last 5, 6, 7 years, not just out of us, but out of the larger movement here, which I found both amazing and very exciting. I was inspired by the Marin Carbon Project. This is John Wick, which was mentioned earlier today, I believe. And the ranchers I worked with, the best ranchers I know in New Mexico, are carbon ranchers. They may not think about it that way, but this is Tom Sidwell, who restored this ranch from a degraded, overgrazed place that he bought in 2003 and brought it back to life, sequestering more carbon, I'm sure. And then other examples like Colin Seiss, which Christine has talked about down in Australia. I ended up writing a book about this, Grass Soil Hope, which was for sale, Chelsea Green. And I'm very thankful to them for taking the leap with me on this. I ended up doing some more research on this, looking for these hopeful answers. There suddenly seemed to be a lot of them. If you go back to the mid-'90s when we got started, we kind of were just talking about a few things: holistic management, creeks, maybe getting along with each other. Suddenly there seemed to be all kinds of stuff going on, embodied in conferences like this one now. As I dug into this, I looked at all these different things. We talked about biochar tonight, cooperatives, food cooperatives, growing topsoil, things like that, fiber sheds. Kaisers in California, they farm year-round without stopping. It's very exciting, and ranches putting all these different parts of it together. Ended up putting them all into another book published by Chelsea Green called 2% Solutions for the Planet. The idea here was, when I tried to get the word out about that there are practical, shovel-ready, low-cost, nature-based solutions to these problems. And when I hear talks, when we talk about the sort of mega challenges, the kind of the doom and gloom that's coming down the road, that kind of stuff, it's hard to get, hard to think of our response. This was my response. These things actually can solve these problems. These are 2% carbon solutions for 2% of the population, for 2% of the GDP. Not a lot of money, a lot of people can solve a lot of these problems. So this was a natural evolution. I felt excited about all this. There really was a lot going on. I tell folks today that toolbox, that regenerative toolbox, has really expanded tremendously in the last 10 years, let's say. Fairly narrow amount of choices. Go back 10, 15 years ago. Now there's a lot going on, as you all know. However, I found myself, a little bit hard to describe, I found myself thinking, looking at the world like this. I was thinking, we're going to look at the world as a graphic, as an analysis, as kind of my intellectual side of me, and I was starting to feel kind of overwhelmed by all these different things. I ended up thinking about E.B. White's quote again about savoring. I ended up wanting to do, this is the world I also wanted to see at the same time, and not just think about kind of these larger issues. And that's the same thing. I mean, that's the carbon cycle. That's the carbon cycle, right? And I found myself needing to spend more time in this kind of landscape and not just thinking about these kind of larger issues. I ended up doing a photography project. I'm a photographer by background. And I just wanted to show you some pictures because I was thinking about this as we go through these issues at this time. We have all these regenerative solutions, but we also think a little bit about kind of the world that we live in and what a beautiful, wonderful place that it is. And I think we tend to lose that when we talk about solutions and pragmatic things and practical things. We start to lose track of the kind of wider, beautiful world out there, especially when we feel sort of gloomy about our prospects. The world that I was seeing as I traveled and gave talks and learned about what other people are up to, I realized was just a fabulous, wonderful place.
Hello everybody, this year marks a milestone, the 50th annual Acres U.S.A. Eco-Ag Conference and Trade Show, happening December 1st through the 4th, 2025 in Madison, Wisconsin. For 5 decades, this event has been the nation's premier gathering for farmers, ranchers, researchers, and industry leaders who believe in building soil health, resilient farm systems, and thriving rural economies. Join us for 4 days of expert-led workshops, dynamic keynote sessions, and the largest Eco-Ag trade show in the country. All designed to give you the tools and connections you need to grow smarter and farm with a purpose. This year's lineup includes innovators like Gabe Brown, Joel Salatin, Rick Clark, Neil Kinsey, Dr. James White, Dr. Don Huber, Helen Attow, Dan Kittredge, Will Harris, Aaron Silva, Dr. Nasha Winters, and many, many more. Don't miss your chance to be part of this historic 50th anniversary celebration at Eco-Ag 2025. Register today at the link in the bio.
And we have 2 children who are now in college, and I was trying to think about these issues with them. This is the Organic Consumers Association's rally in New York. So I wanted to kind of think about that save and savor aspect. Can't just be saving things all the time. And it made me look at chickens a little bit differently now, too, right? I look at them not just in a practical, regenerative way, but also as something that's kind of attractive. Chickens want around. Maybe look at meetings a little bit differently too, right? So I don't mind going to meetings so much. There are lots of challenges. In the last 10 years, fracking has taken off, but also we can't lose track of Shakespeare. Our children got involved in a Shakespeare troupe. Again, reminding me that there's this kind of larger world out there that we sometimes lose track of. So as I was working through these issues, it seemed like the challenges continue to rise on us. Thinking about children, so we talked about some of it today. There was a statement that came out just a couple of weeks ago in November. 15,000 scientists have signed on to a letter about catastrophic warming. And what do you do in the face of that? I mean, just feel paralyzed. What are we going to do? Even though I knew that there were solutions, where was the hope here? What do you do? Well, I went back and got involved with Gabe Brown this summer. Again, thanks to Chelsea Green. I'm in the process. We're in the process right now of co-authoring a book with Gabe, who I think is familiar to many of you here as one of the leaders in regenerative agriculture. And I found that this was really the answer to that stress I was feeling, that as we kind of rose to the challenge with these practices, that the challenges continue to climb on us. So those of you who know Gabe or don't know Gabe, he has a ranch in North Dakota in Bismarck that he manages fabulously on a lot of levels. And for many folks who don't know what regenerative agriculture is about, I threw this in. So this are the things that Gabe does. It's a biological system with no tillage, pesticides. He's got diverse cover crops, on-farm fertility, multiple crop rotations, managed livestock grazing. It'll all be in the book that'll be out next year. Again, familiar to many of the folks here, no need to go into details, no-till. But this is the kind of image that I saw in his place, again, thinking about what Christine said about green, diverse, green. Here it was on his place, earthworms, animals moving into crops, the way that Gabe does things, very integrated, very holistic. Pigs, he's got sheep, he's got bees, he's got all kinds of things going on in the place. And his son, who's also deeply involved in the farm, sent me this picture, and I thought this was a great example of save and savor together, not working too hard on the ranch. He did this as a joke. They did this when they moved their calving from deep winter to late May. And I thought that what a wonderful image in terms of doing all the right things to address these issues and also having a beer. Just to show that it's not all fun and games, this is the business model, the Brown Ranch business model based on carbon. And again, it'll be explained in the book, but you can see all the different things that he's doing here. Gets pretty left-brainy here, I guess. And also, when I saw this, and Christine showed this in her workshop on Tuesday, I got hopeful again. So here is what Gabe has done over time, moving from 1993 to 2013. This is the amount of carbon he's put in the soils. This is from Dave Johnson, who's a microbiologist at New Mexico State University, raising the soil organic matter. When Gabe stopped using nitrogen fertilizer, you can see the rise there. This is very hopeful. It's a little wonky to look at, but for all the reasons that Christine and other folks have talked about, the role of carbon and nitrogen here, Gabe is implementing it. And that's why I showed you the images of grass and the animals, but this is really what it's all about. And then I did a little more digging into this, feeling more hopeful about these situations. And I found a publication called Project Drawdown. I don't know if folks know this. It came out this summer. It's a book out of California listing all the different practices that bring carbon dioxide levels down. So that's why it's called Project Drawdown. There's about 80 of them that are being implemented and a bunch more in the list. But what's important about this, looking at the book, and they cover the whole range from renewable energy to nuclear power to everything else, what was really eye-opening was regenerative agriculture was number 11 from the top. That's great. Only behind silvopasture as number 8, I believe it was. And this was really cool. So we listened to these doom and gloom kind of scenarios. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Well, we know what to do. We know how to fix creeks. We know how to manage livestock. We know how to produce local food. We know how to produce grass-fed food, organic food. We know how to do this. Thanks to Gabe and other folks, we know how to integrate them all. We know how to raise soil carbon levels, nitrogen levels, organic nitrogen levels. We know how to do this. This is not theoretical. And then this book put the numbers to it. If you go and look at it, they've got all kinds of data on how this works. They expect a 1,000% increase in the quantity of acres in regenerative agriculture in only 20 years, 1,000% increase. And this is important because the folks who read this book, look at it, are probably not agriculturalists. They're mostly folks who live in cities, worry about climate change, policymakers, that sort of stuff. And when they see agriculture in there, silvopasture, regenerative agriculture, things like that, this really helps push this more hopeful message. Here are two statements from it that I really like a lot. Regenerating the health of the soil by restoring its carbon content, which in turn improves plant health, nutrition, and productivity. This is how they define regenerative agriculture. And then they say in the text, no other mechanism known to humankind is as effective in addressing global warming as capturing carbon dioxide from the air through photosynthesis. And you heard a lot about this week. So this is hopeful. Some days I don't feel hopeful. Many days I do. Thanks to the hard work of many of you in this room, ranchers like Gabe and others, we actually can put the numbers and the practices to all of this. And so it's been a long journey for me from thinking about cattle management in the dry Southwest 20 years ago, trying to figure out how we're going to get environmentalists to pay attention to ranchers here, to this kind of sophisticated, hopeful integration of all these different practices. I find it very exciting. It's not happening at the policy level. God forbid that it would happen at the national level, but it is happening at the grassroots level. And that's been my message to folks, is that at the grassroots level, particularly for non-agriculturalists to hear, that this stuff is happening. And it's pretty eye-opening for folks, particularly who live in cities, to think about the role of agriculture positively in the solution to these problems. So having said all that, I still think about E.B. White and his quote, and as much as I am hopeful and excited about saving things, I also like this. It's like just the land, just to go out on it and see it and walk in it and think about sunrises and storms and things like that without having. So that's my message, is that if you can figure out a way to balance the save and the savor and the beauty with the pragmatic, which you can do in agriculture, that's the most hopeful thing I can see on the horizon. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Acres U.S.A. podcast, a podcast production of Acres U.S.A. Find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, and other popular podcast platforms. Acres U.S.A. is North America's oldest publisher on production-scale organic and regenerative farming. For more than 50 years, our mission has been to help farmers, ranchers, and market gardeners grow food profitably, regeneratively, and with nature in mind. Find our books and other Acres USA media and learn about Acres USA events at acresusa.com. Read our online magazine at members.acresusa.com, and we'd like to thank Acres USA staff for their contributions to producing this podcast. This episode was edited and engineered by Weston Larson of Acres USA. We're grateful to our guests for taking the time to talk with us about their experiences.